All right, let's talk about these armed protesters in Oregon. They've been occupying a federal building there since Saturday, and they've now announced their demands. They say they won't leave until the two ranchers who inspired the protests, both convicted of arson, are freed.
They added that the government must give up control of the wildlife refuge they're currently holed up in. Our Sarah Seidner reviews how the situation has escalated so far.
We came very well prepared. We're in it for the long haul.
Today, they gave themselves a name, Citizens for Constitutional Freedom. They took us into the National Wildlife Refuge headquarters that they have taken over on federal lands, saying the government has occupied it illegally. What are you planning to do with this takeover?
Restore the lands. Restore the lands to the people.
For 3 days and 3 nights, they've had no resistance from law enforcement.
You said you were here to help the citizens of Harney County. That help ended when a peaceful protest became an armed occupation. The Hammonds have turned themselves in. It's time for you to leave our community, go home to your families, and end this peacefully.
They say they will be peaceful if the police are, but they're armed just in case. Has anyone said anything to give you some idea that there's going to be bloodshed?
We've been hearing all kinds of reports from people still in town that the sheriff is saying we're leaving it either in body bags or handcuffs. So of course, it just makes people nervous.
We recognize 2 of the men right away. That's John Reitzheimer, known for recently organizing anti-Islam rallies in Arizona. And the group's leader, Ammon Bundy, the son of Cliven Bundy, a Nevada rancher who made national headlines for his stand against the government on his own ranch over land use rights. But this time, it's Bundy and the rest of these men supporting a different ranching family, the Hammonds. Prosecutors say the Hammonds were hunting deer on federal land and set fire to cover their tracks. The Hammonds claim they were just trying to clear invasive brush. Despite serving time and being released, they turned themselves in again today after a federal judge ordered them back to prison for 5 more years. That was a call to arms for these men and women. They call themselves patriots, following the Constitution, but their critics have other names for them.
And there's a lot of social media discussion about what y'all are doing out here. They've used words like Al-Qaeda and Vanilla ISIS. And while they sound like funny names, they're basically calling you terrorists. How do you respond to these kinds of accusations?
Well, I would just encourage that and one is, I think that is the minority, but I would encourage people to look into what's really happening and to find out who is truly doing the terrorizing, who's been taking ranches. This refuge alone, over 100 ranches have been taken, and so that they can make this park, this refuge.
CNN national security analyst Juliette Kayyem joins us now from Boston to talk about this. Juliette, an armed militia has taken over a federal building with political aims. Why is this not being referred to as terrorism?
Well, I think as a legal matter, it absolutely is terrorism. It's the use of force or the threatened use of force for political ends or to make a political statement through undemocratic means. There is a reason, however, that the government is not throwing around the word terrorism is simply because they do not want to escalate the situation. I mean, there are heavily armed men who are sitting essentially alone, isolated, and eventually they will get bored, they will run out of food, and your hope is that you just sort of can wait them out at this stage.
Now, the main issue with these guys is the frustration that Dwight Hammond Jr. and Stephen Hammond had to serve jail time for burning federal land. The Hammonds have already turned themselves in to finish their sentence. So does that now change the equation for the federal government and police, because they've yet to even approach this armed group yet?
Yes, I mean, it may change the calculation, and it may change the calculation for Bundy, the leader of the group in Oregon, and his team. They seem to be separate. I mean, in other words, that the Hammonds and the Bundys are not actually in collusion, and actually are quite separate in what their goals are. But for the government, whether it's the local public safety or federal law enforcement, right now the main goal is to protect human life and to make sure that the situation does not escalate. And the federal government has all the time in the world. I mean, these guys are very isolated. They're not going to be able to survive that much longer.
Now, for people who are watching this after a year when we've seen unarmed black men being shot by police, we've seen Islamophobia because of the behavior of a few jihadists affecting all Muslims, you know, some folks wonder why such a tame approach for this armed group. Online people referring to this group as Al-Qaeda or vanilla ISIS. You know, are they being treated differently, you think, because they're white, meaning not as harsh as the Black Lives Matter activists, for example?
Well, I just, you know, it's a hard comparison. I will say no one professional in law enforcement would condone any of the situations that we've seen, in particular with unarmed African-American youth and their interactions with law enforcement. I think because this area that we're seeing is so isolated, there's no civilians around, there's no urban pedestrian movement, there's no one really at risk, that it actually allows law enforcement to sort of be able to stand back. But I understand the perception problem here, which is it's a bunch of white guys who are actually armed, who are sort of given a bye, and unarmed African-American children, essentially, in many urban areas, are being killed. And it's you know, it's nothing to either explain or forgive. It's just what it is right now.
Folks can take a look at your article on CNN.com. Face it, Oregon building takeover is terrorism. Juliette Kayyem, our national security analyst, thanks so much for joining us from Boston today.
Thank you.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.